Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Thank you for joining us and welcome to today's webinar. Today, we're going to be delving into advisory versus discretionary portfolios and talking about the hidden risks and benefits. I'm very pleased to see that our other panelist, Ash, has managed to now log in. We were doing a bit of a challenge, Annika, this morning, tracking his location across London to get into the studio on time, but I'm glad you're here, Ash.
Morning, Ben. Thanks. Lovely to be here.
So I personally have been looking forward to this session for quite a while. This is a topic that Melo, we get asked about quite a lot, is advisory, discretionary, MPS. What's the difference? How does it work? What are the responsibilities under each? And I'm really pleased that we're joined by the experts from 8am Global to, I suppose, put to bed some of those myths and get really the facts so that you listening can make your own decisions about which portfolio service, if any, is the best thing for you. I'm Ben Wright, founder and chief innovation officer at Melo. If you've not heard of Melo before, we are a consultancy firm. We only work with financial planning businesses. We're all ex-financial planners. And really, we help businesses to scale through leadership and strategy, through to proposition, people and process. And when a firm has scaled to a suitable level and it's time for them to look at a new direction, we will help that transaction by acting as a sell-side broker to make sure that the owner gets a decent exit. Now, before we get into the discussion for today, let's introduce our panelists. So I'd like to hand over to Paul to introduce 8am Global as a business and yourself.
Hey, thanks, Ben. Really nice to be here. So 8, we are a DFM, and really what we do, our business is kind of split into two parts. We do quite a lot of off-the-shelf MPS. The idea with that really is to kind of reduce as much human bias from the process as possible. And then alongside that, our side of the business looks after partnerships, co-manufacturing mandates. So we've been doing this for quite some time. In fact, the business sort of originally started in that way. So our brand is small but growing, and partly because we've been beneath, or the engine beneath, quite a lot of mandates for quite some time.
Excellent. And tell us about your role at 8am, Paul.
So my role is head of distribution, but really that is kind of everything beyond up to the point where me and Ash kind of overlap a little bit on some things. But yeah, I look after the sales team here. I look after marketing and our new clients and existing. So yeah, head of distribution, that's who I am.
Thank you, Paul. And over to you, Ash.
I'm glad Paul said what lies beneath. This is my third favourite mid-2000s horror film. I'm glad we brought it in so early. Was the question what my role is? Or
yes, yeah. Tell us about your role at 8am, Ash.
My role is head of MPS, which is one I've given myself, and I shall give myself another one at the end of this webinar if anyone can come up with a better title for me. But ostensibly, investment, design, a little bit of distribution, but far less so. Now I have the most able-bodied Paul with me as well. But fundamentally, sit on the committees, design the stuff, work with people far cleverer than me to build stuff out. But as it's catching, ex-advisor turned gun for hire on this side. Been doing it about a decade, there or thereabouts.
Perfect. Thank you, Ash. Now, we've got a range of topics to cover today, but I am keen to make sure that we answer your questions. We have had some questions sent in already. Thank you for the people who sent those in. If you would like to ask a question, do so in the Q&A and we will get through as many as we can. If for any reason we haven't got time to answer your question, we will send it out afterwards in a Q&A document where we'll cover everything that we discussed today. This webinar is also going to be recorded. You'll get a link out for the recording afterwards so you can rewatch. Please feel free to share it with anybody else who you think will benefit. Yeah, so without further ado, let's get into the meat of our discussion. Now, where I'd like to start things is around terminology. So I've been, well, when I came into the advice profession, it was kind of 20 odd years ago. And at that point we had advisory or discretionary. And then since that point, we've then had MPS. And then more recently, we've had co-sourced, insourced, and a range of different sources, manufacturing, co-manufacturing, dual manufacturing. It seems like we've gone kind of terminology crazy. Can we start off with just a bit of an explanation from you guys on What are the different things? What do they mean? Which is the same thing but have different words? Try and demystify this terminology piece.
Sure, I'll go if that's okay, Mr. Hogg. I think a large
Sure.
part of it can be explained by it's almost like sedimentary layers of time. So you start off with purely advisory, and as I said, back in the dark days of buying Gartmore multi-manager cautious and similar funds that no longer exist, you pick multi-manager funds, or you completely outsource to a bloke with three surnames, and you pay him lots and lots of money to do so, and the client feels very, very valued for that. And occasionally, I mean, once again, Ben, you'd know better than I, advisors would pick their own single strategy funds, and that was dubbed a variety of different things back sort of 10, 15 years ago. When MPS became a thing, in inverted commas, probably 10, 15 years ago, that's a battle cry from the advisor community to say, actually, we'd rather not pay through the nose for what is ostensibly, a mathematical model for stuff. And, the last 10 years has been the industry finding out what effective price point is for that. The insourced outsourced thing is interesting. For me, it's quite simply if a firm is doing a sort of rolling buy list of the type of funds that they like and blending them together and observing them once a year, that's a perfectly sound advisor-led investment strategy. I've heard that called insourced, but I've heard it called lots of different things as well. And then depending on the amount of that process they're outsourcing to a DFM, and again, that can be anything from X to overlay to research to anything. There are different different terminologies for tailored model solutions, but I've heard them called tailored, templated, bespoke, insourced, outsourced. I mean, genuinely, I think I have heard it called about 20 different things in the last week, as it seems pretty much every news article I've seen, although possibly my news sources of bias, have just been going, yeah, the new future is co-manufacturing, and this is the way forward. But ostensibly, the real line has been co-manufacturing came about as a title and a thing in my eyes with the duty, which is fine. And at that point, everyone had to start taking themselves as product producers a little bit more seriously and going, oh, is this simple buy list I'm operating actually operating as a DFM? And of course, that's been the advent of this stuff over the last couple of years, with people trying to discern what is and isn't discretionary. And of course, when the regulator tells me, I'll tell you.
Yes, yeah, indeed, Ash. So it's a very good point. Just to kind of, I suppose, break it down to the real basics on this one, just so we're all kind of clear then. So advisory models are that, or the defining fact of an advisory model is that every time the advisor wants to make a change, they have to get agreement from the client. That's the crux of it.
Absolutely right.
Yeah, and everything else falls into the discretionary camp, which means that we can make decisions on behalf of clients.
Absolutely.
And then it's just whether the triple-barreled surname chappie makes a decision or whether you do it with him, which is kind of the co-manufacturing. Should we just agree on co-manufacturing to discuss everything that's in that middle bracket where we work with an advisor that works with an MPS provider?
Let's use co-manufacturing as the safe word, Ben. Yeah.
As the safe word. Excellent. So I think that set the scene quite nicely then for the difference between those portfolios. What I'm really keen to make sure that we touch on, and therefore I'll jump in next with this, is the responsibilities aligned with each of those different styles of operating. So what are your responsibilities if you are running an advisory model, if you are outsourcing completely, or if you're running a co-source model? And maybe we could start from the permission perspective. Paul, maybe jump in?
Yeah, I mean, I think my view generally, I think, is that if you materially shape the portfolios, then you are the manufacturer. And I think the idea also in terms of the product alignment is the same. And that means the target market evidence, all the kind of testing, the MI that goes around it. So, I think we generally try and offer a modulate way to kind of access components of bits and pieces. But I think ultimately it's important to say that I believe the view is if you are constructing, whether you've got the permissions or not, then that advisory view or however you're building it, you are the manufacturer. So that's kind of the baseline view, which I think is useful to point in.
So we had a question sent in on that actually, which is probably a good time to run it. So the question was, The question was, we're currently running advisory model portfolios. Are we classed as a manufacturer?
I think if
that's
you,
advisory portfolios, so nothing discretionary, purely advisory.
yeah, I think if you design it, you manufacture it, whether you meant to or not. That would be my answer on there. Effectively, if you design and maintain them, then under prod and the FCA's view, yeah, 100%.
Okay, very useful. And in terms of reporting, how does the reporting differ across advisory, co-created solutions, co-manufactured solutions, and then you can have your outsourced solutions?
Well, I think if you're running a solution like this, and Ash, correct me if I'm wrong, the reporting is the same. What changes is who does it and who supports you with it. So, effectively, when we're running it, you've got the target market assessments, the ongoing monitoring, the distribution, the MI of its effectiveness, the peer group testing. So really it's kind of, well, why have we designed this? Who have we built it for? And then the regular evaluation of that process all the time. So it's not the requirements of reporting that change. It's often the fact that actually by entering into a joint investment committee or a partnership with a DFM, what you're doing is you're getting support on those elements to say, well, actually, we can help build the target market assessment, or as part of a DFM's process, they will evaluate this against a peer group, for example, or a composite benchmark, as well as what's actually shown on the fact sheet. So yeah, I don't actually believe that the reporting requirements change. It's just the support structure underneath.
I'm sorry, Ben. There's a couple of misconceptions that I hear all the time, which is people will infer that things are product or not product on the basis of the amount of interactivity and action in the portfolio. So, for example, if they're operating an annual buy list, that's not discretionary and not a product, and therefore it doesn't apply to me because I'm just writing to my clients once a year, which is not the case. And the area that people really fall down on and don't realize, it's not all of the research that Paul's mentioned is absolutely correct in that you are expected to know and do proper research and understand what you're doing and why you're doing it. But it's separating out client segments and saying this is for this and this is for that and this is for this person, which is usually is done to a large extent. The bit that's missing is, and the bit that you'll get in trouble for, is not having a proper externally referenced assessment of value on what you're building. So simply putting out a model range which works for you and says, well, it's made a bit more than mixed asset 2060 over 5 years, so it's probably fine, is okay if your target market is specified that you're doing that and you've got a cost target you're going to, or whatever the specific things that align to that. But usually the client segment hasn't been defined well enough to allow there to be a very loosey-goosey definition of value on the other side. Normally there'd be an expectation where you'd be doing some peer sampling and going, okay, well, here are the big 5 to 10 MPS players that are in the space. Have I nominally outperformed them or even offered similar levels of risk-adjusted value over any period of meaningful time? And again, here's the great irony. You don't have to outperform them. You just have to make sure that you have tested and you can demonstrate to somebody that what you're doing isn't completely out of line with the accepted normal. Now, I'm not suggesting everyone should track and be exactly the same, and there should be no active share or active positioning, but it's just that is a data pain in the proverbial, and a lot of the support that firms like ours offer isn't us coming in and going, right, you should definitely buy this asset class or overweight this or underweight this or use this process or use that. It's simply saying, look, from a data aggregation and research exercise, this is what we do day in, day out. And I think the old message used to be, trust us as a DFM because we've got a greater research capacity, ergo we can outperform. But with greater and greater pressure for managers to simply not underperform, rather than outperform over any period of time, the pressure is really on that data aggregation piece, which is where I and probably there's 5 or 6 players in the marketplace that are half sensible that do what we do, have all come from. It's really a data aggregation piece.
Thank you, Ash. And I think I'd like to kind of circle back around who does what in that kind of co-source space or co-manufactured space, because the advisory side of things is quite straightforward. Yeah. The firm themselves will create a portfolio, they'll run it as they see fit, and they make all the decisions. Fully outsourced, you pick your favorite, and then they do everything for you. But if we're moving into this kind of this co-manufactured space, one of the questions, in fact, we had sent in was that a firm currently have advisory models because they want control over the investments, but they are considering doing something in that kind of co-manufactured space. And the question was, how much control can they have over a co-manufactured solution?
Sure. It's decidedly straightforward, actually, and also I'll extend their question because the reason that advisors run this themselves is partially because they want control, but also it's a fundamental trust and cost value thing for the client, right? Because of course, generally speaking, external outsourced stuff, there was a lack of control, and also implicitly you're giving away some aspects of the value chain as well. When it comes to who does what, quite simply, the firm that we're partnering with has complete control to design what the product and mandate is relative to their target market. So you can say a certain level of volatility, cost, geography, type of instrument, not a type of instrument, any parameter you can think of, but there have to be defined edges for the mandate for the rule set to actually exist. Then we as managers will then run that to that rule set, customized specifically to that firm. And this is something that I'm particularly hot on because taking an existing off-the-shelf product, white labeling it, shoving your logo on it and charging a bit more is, in my view, a pretty heinous crime. The reality of white labeling this stuff is going to be a topic that the regulator looks at as part of the NPS review. And if you're doing it, please stop now. The reality is bespoke and tailored NPS is designed and works really, really well when the advisor firm has a very specific client segment they need to address. And I can think of a couple of examples on our side where we've designed something which literally cannot operate as a large whole of market offering and must only operate for a small subset of specific clients, or is trying to do something which is incredibly specific, nuanced, or isn't available off the shelf anywhere else. And it's something which I think people miss because they go, right, well, I've been running a portfolio suite for 32 years. And my returns are great, and my clients love it, and I've got this great way of picking funds, and that's fantastic. In those cases, those are my ideal clients. I go, fantastic, you've got all this great stuff you've done. All I'm going to do is just prop a couple of, look, here's an upper limit, here's a lower limit, as however we're going to define risk. You can jump on the committee with us. You can sit there as an active member of that. We obviously have to take on the burden of the final, agency and decision to do the thing. But if we're running it to your commission standard, you are telling, that's very, I was going to say, we're like Michelangelo, that's very outrageous. You are commissioning us to build you a sculpture, and you say, I want it to be this high, and I want the feet to be this big, and I want it to have this many fig leaves, etc. We are literally operating to your instructions, so you always have control, but you want and you should give the agency to someone with all of the data. It doesn't have to be us, obviously, the other players are available, but you should demonstrably, for an efficient business, give that externally. And given that you can retain all rights over the IP and the branding, etc., etc. Sometimes I don't get the resistance, other than the fact there's an inference that I'm somehow going to steal the money, or
I think it's important to kind of contain that. So it's basically, the firm will control, or generally should retain access to the control of the strategic levers.
Yeah.
Yes. So like they're not sort of giving up control in a way, but they're adding governance. Yeah. So an oversight. So that often for me in these conversations, it's that reframing of understanding that actually what I'm not doing is letting go of that control. I'm retaining it, and I'm sort of building the ship, as it were. And then all we're doing is helping to steer it by going, okay, we're adding the governance on top and helping to define some of these thresholds where you're holding the firm or the business or the JIC to account. And that's all it is, really. So I think it's largely a misconception. Perhaps not all DFMs operate in the same way. So that like lack of control is actually, it can be a risk, because you go, right, I'd love to do this. And that firm says, brilliant, we'd love to help you. But what you have to do is start using our asset allocations, or you have to start using our fund universe, or you have to do things in this way. So I think if you're entering into a conversation of compromise, 100%, that feels like control is going. But the conversation shouldn't be about that. It should be much more about, how can we help effectively put scaffolding around your existing framework and make it super good. Because the actual conversations that we're having, our firms, I mean, we see it all the time when we've spoken about different things, and you've spoken about different things like the advice gap, Ben. And it's like, actually what we're talking about here is it's a capacity issue as well. How can you service all of these clients all the time to the standard that you're required to, if also you're having to build and maintain and do all these things? So it's not the control that's gone, it's a layer of governance that's added. That was supposed to be short, but it ended up long. Sorry.
You've learned from me, mate. Sorry.
Yeah, it's bad.
So in my very simple brain, I'm kind of thinking that your advisory portfolios are design it and run it yourself. Your co-manufacturers design it and somebody else runs it, and your outsourcers pick somebody else's and then they run it.
Yeah, exactly.
We're nailing through this.
Yeah. That's straightforward, right? It's easy.
It's easy. Yeah,
it's easy. I think one of the things around advisory, and I've done a lot of work with advisory portfolios over the years. When I used to be in a network, we had advisory model portholes that the network created and then allowed all of the ARs to use, and they were very well liked, very well used. However, we did an audit of who was in which portfolios, and that was interesting. Because if you think about the advisory space, and one of the challenges I think in that particular space is that you start on day one with model 1, and you have risk levels 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then after a quarter, you do a change, and when you run that change, then you get 95% of people say yes, and 5% of people don't respond. So they're still on model 1.
This is the classic issue, and even if you get these automation processes that say, well, we'll help and supercharge advisory by sending out emails so that we can increase that 95% to 97%, that ends up compounding the issue. It's bonkers, man.
And I promise I'll be quick. It's also, you can obviously automate on a lot of platforms to do a rebalance based on tolerance, which in theory mitigates the issue client to client, which is true. The problem you've got is that then you technically have to test a sample of all of the underlying to make sure the aggregate performance of client 36 alpha isn't demonstrably different from 36 beta. So mechanically one can do it, but then you do actually technically have to sample a subset and go, right, this is what I'm showing as an aggregate level of performance is kind of in the ballpark of what the average client could receive. So it's one of those classic things where it solves one problem and creates another administrative one. So it's not that helpful.
Yeah, and I think on the administrative perspective, because we're all about Melo, we're all about business efficiency, making things run as quickly as they possibly can. And generally, firms who run advisory portfolios will have staff dedicated to that. And they spend time and they spend effort pushing that stuff through. And, where it is an absolute core part of your offering, I suppose it makes sense, but you have got extra headcount in there doing stuff which you could quite easily give to somebody else and outsource and probably achieve the same result of providing great financial advice which changes lives. And
sorry, Ben, half the reason people come to us is cost in business or the concerns about administrative leakage or errors and the compound effect of the PI and everything else. And half of it is just the regs or a combination of both and going, actually, I don't know whether I want to adhere and do all of this stuff. But in all the instances I've worked with firms where they've got a large headcount on the administrative side, in all instances, those personnel have just been repurposed and gone back to being either paras or gone back into the normal chain. Because ordinarily it's a seconded role, right? Because there's loads of activity once a quarter and then NAF all the rest of the time. So it ends up usually being para 1, 2, or 3 operations head and also is looking after the portfolio function as well. So it never normally, I don't have to come in with a big scythe and cause massive, mass admin redundancies. It's normally people just returning to what they do best anyway. So.
Thanks, Ash. We've had a question come in. If an advisor enters into a co-manufacturing as part of their journey to obtain their own discretionary permissions, are they able to take over the running of the models on the platform? I suppose when they get their permissions.
Yes, and I'm going to say yes with a little why, because and this is like, I don't know, half of the people we work with are on a sort of 2 to 3 year journey to get their own permissions, either before the point of sale or to tidy a book up. A lot of what we do is helping people tidy stuff up ahead of an event, be it permissions or not. The answer is once you start running a portfolio suite, obviously you come into this deal with us or anyone else owning your own intellectual property, i.e., your brand, the way you run money. If you've got anything specific you're doing, that's yours. The history on the platforms with your client money is yours. The history as we run them with you is yours. And so at any given point, you could appoint a different DFM to run that mandate, even yourself. The crux comes as to whether or not the mandate that is being taken on is identical. And in my experience, and we've done this a few times, and we've taken on mandates from, for example, we've taken on mandates from other DFMs as well. Usually you have to, well, you have to tell the client, that's funny, but you have to tell them, and in some instances, because there are tiny variations, it is an explicit opt-in. Other times it's this is happening, tell me if you don't want it to happen, on the predication you're simply appointing a new DFM to run the same mandate that the client has signed up for as part of that suitability pack. So you've gone, this is a model which runs like this, there are defined edges, etc., etc. We no longer have Bill doing it, we have Ted doing it. I don't know why I've cited Bill and Ted. And normally,
because of the side reference earlier,
yeah, exactly.
Bogus Journey.
It was an excellent adventure.
Thank you, thank you all. Oh, the vibes, great. So no, but hang on. I've taken myself off. So the point is that if as long as the mandate's the same, it should be a pretty much friction free, as long as you have the ability within your back office to write to however many clients in one go and do it. And I speak from experience, having done that exercise about a week ago with a firm where we wrote 400 letters as part of a pack from one to t'other. So it's a bit of administrative grunt. I can't pretend it's just click and it's done, because you have to tell the client. But from a mechanical perspective, it is click and it's done. But from suitability, a bit more.
I think we've seen often, I think because we like building stuff, we're well aware that the nature of this work is often of the nature of transition. So, you go in, as Ash says, help tidy up, help clean up, help build a proposition that may move on. And it's kind of that's often the journey that our clients want to go on. I think we've started to see, or at least I have, businesses that do similar things, trying to do strange stuff like lock in 5-year terms for a co-manufacturing agreement, or trying to create a framework where they retain for a particular period of time their presence, which, I mean, I don't know, it's actually a question I'd like to ask you, is whether or not that is, I mean, how does that work? How can you even put a time frame on a partnership when A, you might have a different objective, or B, you may want to replace the manager if the outcomes aren't what you expected? So I think, it's very easy to do that reassignment unless you're contractually beholden.
So if you're going to enter into some kind of co-manufacturing agreement, it is important to understand the potential exit from that co-manufacturing agreement. And
100%.
I think it's like any contract, isn't it? You want to make sure you understand what you're signing up for, and it will fit the bill for what you're trying to achieve. I'm sure all the MPS providers who do this type of thing will have a slightly different way of operating. So no offense to you guys, but anyone thinking about this, probably go and talk to a few different providers just to make sure you understand who it is you're working with and you're comfortable with the way that's going to work together.
We're quite different to others. We talk to quite a few firms, and we'll say the same thing. I think you should go and speak to others as well and see how they do it. And we're quite happy to have conversations with firms. I mean, we're to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of our experiences too. So 100% the correct thing to do.
Thanks both, and thank you very much for your question as well. Don't forget, if you have a question, drop it in the question and answer section, and we will make sure that we get to it. Just picking up on what you said slightly earlier, Ash, about kind of that moving across from having a co-manufacturing to run your own permissions. We have had a question that came in around moving from advisory to some kind of in-source solution. The crux of the question was, what's the easiest way to migrate clients from solution 1 to solution 2?
Got it. We've done a few of these, funnily enough, and some of them engage a consolidated platform exercise at the same time, which, depending on your view, could be seen as easier, because ordinarily there's a cost advantage of doing that if you're moving all your clients to one place, so you tie everything up in one piece of advice. Others will keep everyone in situ and then apply that on top. The exercise mechanically is, you've always got to tell everybody, obviously. Normally the partner you go with will supply you with, as we do, a pack which says, look, this is the mandate and the way it was run before. This is everything that's staying. These are the extra bells and whistles you're getting, because in my view, what we do should be additive. I'm going to charge him basis points, so it should be additive what we're doing to the process. So in theory, it should be relatively straightforward to say to a client, okay, here is your suitability letter. You were running ABC Advisor Portfolio 5 here. 8am or indeed any other are taking over ABC Portfolio 5, which is now called ABC Portfolio 5 brackets, X or something. And with that, what we're getting is all the same stuff you come to know and love, whatever the fund selection methodology is or things and everything else, all the same investment people at the firm, plus ATM are going to add in these risk parameters or this data set or this rule set or this reporting line or get you access to these share classes. And for that, they'll charge, I'll throw a number up, 15 basis points, just as a number because that's our default charge. But we're going to save 10 because of share class variation, another 5 because we've tied up a load of positioning, and we're going to save 5 because the platform's cheaper. So net saving of 5 basis points, and isn't it a great idea? That's the dream, right? Because it's nice and simple and obviously a no-brainer. The mechanics of it are we and most providers have a tool set which will enable the advisor to go, right, here's my whole client bank spread over normally 17 different platforms with 52 different family charging structures, etc., etc. We will help support to code up basically a big old SQL table to go, right, clients 436 down to here. Here are the cost savings for doing that. I know I'll help them build a mail merge. I'll do some of the coding on the back end to make all of that stuff work. It is unfortunately, though, it comes down to a single point in time recommendation, if that's the question. If, from a suitability perspective, there is a moment where you have to tell the client, you were in model X, you're now in model Y, but from that point on, once they're in that discretionary environment, then it's, you could in theory replace us with somebody else, yourself, or a different DFM relatively easily.
Yeah, thank you, Ash. And certainly I've seen it done two ways, one of which is with each individual client at the annual review meeting move across, which takes a bit longer, but can be more personal because you can explain why it is you're making the change. The other way I've seen it is kind of the mass approach where you kind of mail everybody at once to ask for an opt-in in effect to move across to the new portfolios. And it's good if you guys can help with all the analysis around that, or I think other providers can help with the analysis around that. It will make life a whole lot easier. Thank you. Off the back of that, one of the questions that I've personally been asked a couple of times is about repositioning with clients. Because I think it's fair to say that practices who run their own advisory models tend to make a thing about it with clients. So they'll have told their clients, we do our own model portfolios, we do our own research, it's our thing. And it's almost like a bit of the sell to get them in was the fact that there is this advisory portfolio being run. And the question I've had is, how do I go about repositioning this without losing face almost? And certainly my advice is not to say anything was wrong previously, but just to say, the world evolves, we're evolving how we operate, and we found a way to give you as good, if not better, an outcome in a more efficient way of working. So it's almost kind of saying what we did was good, and now we found an even better way of doing it, which is over here. But I'd be interested in your views, because you've obviously done quite a few of these migrations. What advice would you give to firms?
I think it's the same as we touched on before. In a way, it's and as you said, evolution. So it's not revolution. It's evolution. It's you're adding. So you're adding the governance. I think the idea is that they're strengthening oversight in so many cases, and the point of saying the philosophy stays the same. The oversight, the governance is strengthened. So we're adding to the proposition really to free up our time to talk to you more and understand you more. And really that kind of comes down to the end point is, they're not in a way losing that sort of mechanism of control if they don't want to, if that's not part of what's happening. So it's really just about the strengthening of everything else around it. It's the next phase, and this really helps to tighten things up. That would be my answer anyway. I think clients, ultimately, at least they're coming for advice, not spreadsheets. Ultimately, in my view.
You can't sell this stuff on alpha or outperformance or anything like that. I promise I'll be quick. It's if you've been running your own advisor portfolios for years, part of that narrative will be what the externals are doing is of lesser value. It has to have been. Otherwise, you haven't spoken to your clients about it. So additive is fine. evolution is fine narratively, and I've seen both of those work really, really well. We go, we're not reinventing the wheel, and we can all infer what that is. The core is the same. We're adding this layer. That's no problem. The cost is X. We're offsetting it. Don't worry about it. Repeat 5,000 times. The real key is that if you've been very, very negative about DFMs and external stuff for years and years and years, I would understand why you would be that way. And that's a core part of your story. The angle you've got is efficiency, and that's it. You go, this is more efficient and or lower cost, and or we've had it literally. We've been positioned essentially as a vector for administration and better execution and reporting. But don't worry, Sarah, madam, we're still in control of the ship, which is absolutely true in the case of the mandate in question. And the beauty of this stuff is the partner you work with should have no ego. By definition, we are, as Paul said, beneath the surface. So we have no direct need to have anything over top of it. So you're going to control the look and feel of the thing anyway. But I think it's either you just go, we're optimizing up, or it's an efficiency thing down. Those are the plays.
Yeah, thank you both. And it feels instinctively like it's an easier move to go from advisory to some kind of co-manufactured solution, because you are saying it's still my intellectual property, it's still my ideas, just administrative. Maybe it's a slightly different position if you move into an outsourced MPS solution.
Yeah.
The reframing could potentially be around what has happened before has worked really well. I've looked around the market, I've found somebody else who's done equally well, and it means that I can outsource that, and now I can focus more around the actual act of giving advice, more time with you. So it's a slightly different pivot maybe from advisory to full outsource than it is from advisory to kind of co-manufacture.
It's not we're giving up.
Important.
Sorry, Paul. Go on.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, I think it's important that, like we see and you see in all the reports that come out, that the industry is kind of moving in this direction anyway of MPS or multi-asset or because of the pressures to free up time and the administrative burden. And I think that all of these things are really valid answers. The popularity of co-manufacturing in our thing is because it still remains the advisor's answer. The multi-asset solution, the outsourced MPS, are really good. There's a way to sort of plot them into the CIP and create a framework for who's what and where. But within that, I still feel that there's value in there being the advisor's answer to this solution too. And that's really the main difference between all of them, I think.
Perfect. Thank you, Paul. Now, something that, again, I've been asked before is about the value chain and where people can start to take value out of this chain. Should be a quite a straightforward answer, but from a discretionary perspective, you have to have permissions to be able to take anything out of that arrangement, right? Anything else, you can't take any money. Oh, I've got you both thinking about this one.
No.
Yeah, I would say the same.
It depends on what you're doing in the chain. So
Yeah.
I've seen firms whereby, and the most normal thing for me is their ongoing is, let's say, somewhere between 80 and 1%. And as part of their existing defined justification for that is their existing research and an investment function within that stack then. And what they're doing by adding us is we're adding a little bit of marginal cost on the edge, but they're carrying on with that ongoing charge at the high rate because they are still performing exactly the same function they've been performing for 10 or 15 years. Now, the fact that they are, inverted commas, not getting any more, but retain existing level of charge, I think is a completely moot one. because what they're doing is saying, right, I would be charging 75, but in fact I'm charging 90, and I've told my clients this for 30 years because it's on the basis of me being very wise, and here's my process, and this is why, etc. And I think that's absolutely fine, because as with all things, if the client understands and the value is defined as being relevant and there, I think that's no problem at all. And I would extend that same thought process out, but being very, very specific for the purpose of when this is played in court in 20 years' time, is that the point is, if the firm in question is actually adding some value, and I'm pleased you asked, because I was going to champion something a second ago, and this dovetails in. If they're actually adding value, Now, what does that mean? Not designing the thing. Creating this client subsegment as this aligns with my clients is not adding value. That's saying build this like this to service my clients, which is great, but that's asking for something to be built. Even going back and forth on that design process to go, I'd like it to look like this. That great, no problem. But you're essentially commissioning something to be built. Where the real value comes in, and some of the best and most interesting investment ideas I've heard of the last decade are not from the institutional side. They're not from investment houses like those around me. It comes from advisors who are closer to the client and closer to product and are better at designing stuff that fits the client. The idea generation from the advisor community, especially the ones we work with, has been amazing and is probably the greatest single source of like product generation and inspiration that I see every single day. That is value, and you can define that as part of the investment process and their membership. But you've got to define that to the client. The client has to know, they have to know where it's going for and what it's for. So in the same way that you define for 30 years, I'm taking, of my 90, I'm taking 15 of it on the basis that I'm doing this part of the process for you. No problem with defining what that is. And in the same way, if they want to take an additional after building it with me and they say, okay, I was charging 70, I'm going to charge an extra 15 or so, that's fine. Tell the client, I'm not going to name compliance houses, but all the big ones have signed up on this sort of process. But you have to define what you're doing, and it has to actually add some value. You cannot just collect some bunts for turning up. That's the key.
And I suppose just to be super clear on that then, so that is from an ongoing servicing fee perspective.
Correct.
So it's not taking money out of the DFM, out of the ongoing charge from the DFM itself. It's saying, as part of my ongoing servicing agreement with the client, I'm charging you 80, 90, 100, whatever it is, and that includes these services that I'm providing to you.
Yeah, mechanically, it can work both ways. I've seen people set up JVs and money. Again, it's all on. It has to be on the fact sheet. It has to be disclosed. I've seen money come directly out from platform to them. I've seen it get collected by the DFM and paid to them. I've seen them increase their own ongoing. Again, I think from a reporting line, as long as it's separately recorded in your suitability pack and saying this is for this and this is for this, I don't see it as a huge problem if you are clear with the clients about the value. And again, I don't think I could be more fervent on this, but what you cannot do is simply take an existing off-the-shelf thing and bung some bips on top. But that is clearly my axe to grind, so I shall stop going on about it, which is fine.
Thank you. Thanks for confirming that, Ash. So back to the pre-sent-in questions. Here's one that I felt like I had to ask you. Model portfolios are just fancy multi-asset funds. Why not just use a good multi-asset fund and save all the messing about? Whoever sent that in, thank you very much. Over to you guys.
Well, they're demonstrably worse than multi-asset funds in many ways because, of course, the execution is worse. The advent of the model portfolio is obviously investment policy devoid of transmission medium, which is a very tossy way of saying, you run it on a platform or whatever your platform is ostensibly. The reality of running a multi-asset fund, as we have and others have before, is you have a greater universe. You can do more stuff in inverted commas, for good or ill, as proven over the last decade or so. A lot of active specific positioning adds very little alpha over the medium short term. But yes, it is far simpler from a transactional perspective to do that. But I think if you're in the camp of going, here is the mathematically most efficient way at a given price point to achieve my cash flow model, that's fantastic. But I'll be honest with you, you've probably not been running your own advisory portfolio for the last 10 or 20 years. So again, I think this enters into a sort of the round debate I always hear, which is the value part of financial advice. Is it in achieving one's mathematical goal in the most efficient way possible? Or is it in all the soft stuff? Or is the answer, as we all know, somewhere in between those two extremes? Is the advisor that invests only in passive market cap weighted stuff at varying levels of risk a better advisor than one that does their own thing or invests in active managers? And the answer is there is no answer, as there is no specific asset allocation, as there is no specific charging structure that is fair. If clients understand what's going on, they define it as value, they achieve their goals, and no one is charging out width of what is defined as a sensible median, I really don't think there should be an issue with it. But again, people do like to get on the high horse about specific aspects. I'm losing followers by the minute, I can tell.
Thanks, Ash.
I'm one of them, Ash, mate. Yeah. I know.
Interestingly, from a story from my own past, so in a previous life, I was the MD of a multi-asset fund range, which we kind of sponsored, where somebody else did the actual running of the portfolio, a fund manager. And we saw that the biggest change in distribution was when we changed the fact sheets from saying medium fund up by 3% to saying medium fund with 75 underlying holdings, and here where all the underlying holdings were. And then suddenly our distribution increased because the advisor community felt that they could talk about the underlying holdings, and it looked more fancy than it was, I think.
I think the exactly the same when we were looking at reporting back at my old shop, but one was all about the granularity of the data that they were able to use to support conversations and the availability of that. As a pro for MPS as a vehicle versus some of the cons, which generally tend to be wrapper based from my perspective. But I think I absolutely agree. I've seen that before, just in engagement and the perceived value of depth of what's happening underneath that particular instrument.
Engaged client stays invested. The narrative to perform that is different for every client. And as I said, I know it's mathematically for all of us on the call, with a bent to stats, you go, well, it doesn't make any difference if you see 12 lines or 10 lines or 2 lines or 1 line. But optically it does, in the same way that I don't pay a huge amount of attention to what my accountant does, but he sends me a very reassuring pack of paper, and I am assured, and I carry on paying him on that basis. And it shouldn't work like that. But if we want to help our clients achieve our financial goals, they have to stay invested. You can have 1 line and you can fight with them every 6 months, or you can have 12 lines and have more narrative to talk to them and have them more reassured. And again, I'm not the bastion of morality on the whole thing. It's just going, what is a better outcome? Well, it depends is the answer.
Yeah, thank you very much. We've had a question come in from Andrew. If you blend several multi-asset funds together, you're co-manufacturing, as you will have created a portfolio. Yep. Is that correct?
Do you want a short one? Yes. I can give you a much longer one if you like.
Hey, if that answers the question, hopefully that answers your question, Andrew. Yes, you are co-manufacturing if you blend together several multi-asset funds.
I'll give you a 30-second version of that. The assumption by blending multi-asset providers together is that you are betting lots of runners and riders like horses in a race. The correlation of the underlying can be plotted through a variety of off-the-shelf tools like FE and Morningstar and other providers are available. The correlation data is usually out of date. The correlation data is not normally accurate. The correlation data doesn't tell you anything, and they normally behave in a very similar way. Unless you are blending multi-asset providers that are doing something demonstrably and fundamentally different, like Defensive House X and Growthy House Y, etc., in doing so, you are artificially creating complexity and probably friction. So to the earlier point about needless complexity in optics, that's erring slightly towards that. Unless you can demonstrate, that the correlation of these things is demonstrably different in market condition X or Y, and I'm not picking on a house, but like a Troy or a Ruffer or something, which is clearly a defensive, call, relatively speaking, to something growthy, that's no problem at all. But just going, here are big 5 multi-asset funds, I'll stick them all in there and one will be better than the other. It's very difficult to justify. And I'd argue you have the same responsibility to check all of this data, ergo the same problem is still yours.
So somebody is operating along that basis in that they're kind of creating models using multiple multi-asset funds. Where would be the logical place to go next to make things easier to run, but also to still kind of provide that input, that value level?
You would ideally, we do pick up a lot of mandates with lots of multi-asset in there, and it's not like they don't have a place in the portfolio. A lot of the time there is a sleeve for the multi-asset world, but they all have to demonstrably do something separate. Is the question mechanically what would you do to break those up and make the portfolio separate, or is it logistically what would you do to go through the steps?
I suppose what I'm thinking is if we have anybody watching who has, let's say they run models at the moment and the model comprises of 3 multi-asset funds, that is there for each level of risk. You've just said there that's probably not a great idea. What would be where would be the next logical place to go? Should they cut down to 1 multi-asset fund and just kind of pick a horse, or is it more like actually if you're going for that approach, you'd be better off going with maybe like an MPS provider, and again pick a horse, but one with a broader stable maybe?
It's difficult because the answer will be wherever the advisor is deriving their value from is obviously going to be the answer to my question to sort of maneuver around whatever that defined value thing is. The generic answer would be, if you want to have 3 or 4 lines in a portfolio, and I've seen actually a really, really elegant one recently where it is ostensibly, they pick a global equity fund provider over here, a defensive asset fund for corporate bonds, for sovereign bonds over here. So there are only 3 or 4 positions, but they are just then blending those 3 ingredients together. So it's the same essential mechanical building blocks, but obviously they are defining risk in a sort of, this is the risk off bucket, this is the risk on bucket, and push those 2 things together. If you are running 3 or 4 multi-asset funds that are doing demonstrably the same thing for the optics of diversification, a quick check of the correlation of those things on FE or Morningstar or any other tool to go, actually, if they're all sort of correlation together, you would get rid of the most expensive, short term, you get rid of the most expensive one, unless there's some clear advantage in terms of performance to the others. And then you would ideally seek to break them out into geographic buckets. But again, at that point, you're in the realm of, okay, if you don't think you're a manufacturer at the point A, at this point, you're really going to feel like you're a manufacturer breaking all this stuff up there. So again, the answer is probably outsource or get someone to help you build it or something like that. But I was trying to.
Even when they do, I think we've spoken to businesses. I've seen firms before that will also perform the same exercise by blending MPS together.
Yeah.
And even at that point, sorry, just distracted by the question coming in.
Is it just swear words?
No, it's not. Unfortunately, I don't think my mother couldn't make it.
So the question is about blending multi-asset funds. About blending outsourced MPS.
Yeah, it's even more of the same problem because, again, what is the fundamental foible with model portfolios leveled at them apart from anything else? It's we have to build models based off of a smaller pool of assets that are both retail appropriate and available across multiple platforms. So if you're buying off-the-shelf model portfolios from providers X, Y, and Z, which have models over more than 5 or 6 platforms, the Venn diagram for types of assets they can buy is smaller. The chances of those underlying being very, very similar is pretty high. And normally, when you look at a lot of the models that are performing well at the same time, they're going to have a lot of the same ingredients in. So all you're really doing is building one big mega portfolio full of kind of the same ingredients with a bit of stuff around the outside. Again, is it bad? I don't know if it is. I don't know if it adds a whole lot of value, but it's I see it done. But again, it's this idea that people seem to think that models are either terrible or fully discretionary, and of course they are neither of those 2 things. Because there are.
I think the question's more about blending multi-asset funds as manufacturing, but what if you're doing it with MPS? Is that manufacturing? You see, so does the label of manufacturing still apply when you move from multi-asset to MPS? And but you're blending your MPS providers, so you are the one then putting those buckets together and deciding what the mix of them is.
Yeah, you're still curating a list of instruments. Yeah. I think that if you had normal people on here that had some sort of script to speak to and some sort of sense of self-preservation from a capitalist perspective, they might say something different. But you've got to be straight. I'm happy to support people and whatever they want to build. But at the end of the day, unfortunately, the regulator has been pretty clear that if you are designing and building a thing where you are checking the relative performance of instruments and assigning a target and objective to that, you're a manufacturer. You can, skirting around the edge and hoping that they don't check up and you're doing a business plan.
Thank you both, and hopefully that answers your question, Paul. Now, I'm conscious that we are running out of time, but I'd like to just do a couple of quick-fire questions. But they have to be quick fire, guys.
Yep.
So we've had a question sent in beforehand. We're just about to redesign our CIP and we want to include outsourced MPS. What's the best way to compare MPS propositions objectively?
Wow, there are so many. Paul, how many can you think of?
6.
Go on, give them the 6.
I would say philosophy. I would say governance, under duty. Alignment, prod, risk structure, suitability, so where they sit within the individual buckets, costs, obviously, performance, service,
that's more than
reporting.
6.
Damn.
And is there a tool that does this? Is there like I should log on to whatever.com and it will tell me? Or
I'll give
no, I think that's a big hot mess, to be honest. I don't think there's any consistent place to see all this stuff. Even if people tell you there are problems, even in new initiatives that are releasing NPS data, I still think you've got issues where you haven't checked whether those NPSs have actually really been in existence for as long as they say they have. So no.
I might suggest there are repositories of data you could use as a very, very broad filter, and then you'd have to do your own research on the validity.
Exactly.
Asking questions like, are these returns generated from, real investor, time series stuff, or have you, come up with a very big calculator? But quickly, Morningstar, FE, Mabel have one. I'm pretty sure there are 6 others, but we can put them in the show notes.
We will put those in the show notes. So anyone that wants to have a look at those, you can go and see Ash's recommendations for where you can go to help with your decision. But I think that the takeaway for me is it's not as straightforward as, going to a de facto and comparing a list of features. It is more in detail when you're looking at that type of arrangement.
Yeah.
And last question, we've had a question in around, and now I assume that this person is already got discretionary permissions, but I'm not sure. The question is, what level of assets do you need to start a fund?
Depends on your ACD or garbled authorized corporate director and the fund structure itself. Below 50 million, you're really, really, really struggling. Normally when people ask this, if you want to launch your own fund, you're probably launching a series of funds. You're probably not just launching one fund. And usually the recommended amount, if you go to an ACD, is between 50 and 100. 100 is comfortable. Below 50 is very uncomfortable. Ergo, you will have your fund closed down because it won't work properly. And remember, you have to do that times 2 or 3 or 4 risk outcomes that you want to adhere to. Or, the easiest way of doing it, 1 fund for risk assets, 1 fund for non-risk assets, then there's only 2, and you can blend them together. But yeah, I'd say a minimum 100, 150 million quid.
Perfect. Thank you, Ash. And that's all the time we've got for today. I could talk on this subject for a lot longer, but thank you ever so much to both of you for sharing your insights. After the session today, everyone that's tuned in will receive a follow-up email that's got a link to the recording of today's webinar. Please do feel free to share it with anybody else who you think will benefit. The team at 8 a.m. will be sending out CPD certificates, but these can take a couple of weeks, so just please be patient for them to arrive. If you'd like to speak to either the team at 8 a.m. or the team at Melo, please do indicate in your questionnaire after the Zoom. You get a little questionnaire pops up in there. If you pop in your email, phone number, and which team you'd like to speak to, we will get in touch. And finally, a quick heads up about our next webinar, which is on the 21st of October. Head of Progress, Kath Harvey, and I will be joined by Tom Hine from Saturn AI, when we're going to explore how to make shift happen using AI. You can register via the website melo.co.uk, and we would very much love to see you there. But thanks, everybody.
Just holding down the keyboard. I've got shift in.
How to make shift happen, just hold the button down. Thank you for watching, everybody. Thank you to Paul. Thank you for Ash. Hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Bye-bye.